Hello everyone, this is Professor Puny Army, Information Officer of Clan Indigo Oni, here with my personal expectations and concerns of the soon-to-be-released Cold War Alpha that is going to be released to the public this weekend starting on Friday, which will probably be when most people will notice this for those people who do pay attention to what I upload and when I upload. So when you hear this, the alpha will already be available. Now, I'm making this prologue, so to speak, for a couple of reasons. First, to state my basic expectations of potential problems and things I will be very specifically looking out for based upon the reports of other people who were able to play the alpha a little bit earlier. These people were typically professionals within the industry, professional players, etc., as well as journalists of gaming publications who were also given early access to the alpha. So here I will be expressing some of their concerns, some of their thoughts, and what I'm going to be particularly keeping an eye on, especially considering the footage that I've seen of some of this early alpha. Now the first thing I'm going to talk about is the attachments, and there has been some expressed concern that the attachments aren't going to be as varied as the ones in Modern Warfare, but this isn't really something I'm that concerned about. I will be looking into it, obviously, but if you look at the attachments available to this game that you're seeing on screen, Modern Warfare, the attachments for a lot of the guns are identical, with each gun having anywhere from 1 to 3 unique attachments, except in the case of assault rifles, which generally have anywhere from 2 to 5, generally speaking. It really depends by gun, but a lot of them share the same kinds of attachments. Most of them have access to the Commander foregrip, all the same autographs, etc. You know what I'm talking about. If you play around with Gunsmith even a little, you understand what I'm talking about. So, I'm not really concerned about that. The only possible concern is that because it is set in an earlier time period, the future diversity of attachments aren't going to be as large, because we have seen some pretty interesting and unique attachments for post-release guns for this game. But the problem here that I'm really worried about is that the future attachments for Cold War won't be as diverse as that, because, as I stated before, it's in an earlier time period where there just weren't as many interesting things to slap onto a gun. So that'll be somewhat interesting, but it's not something the alpha will reveal particularly. I'm going to be really honest, that's not something I'll be able to estimate from the alpha, for obvious reasons, so that's just something we have to wait and see on. What I am fairly interested in experimenting with are the wildcards, which old fans of the series will be happy to hear are coming back. It will be very interesting for me to experiment with these based on loadout, as well as what kind of attachment numbers we'll be seeing in the alpha, and what attachment numbers we'll be seeing in the released game, if they'll change the number of attachments from 5 to some other number, or what's going to go on there. But I will be very interested in seeing the wildcards. I'm also fairly interested in the score streaks, because if you weren't aware, they have changed it from the kill streaks back to the original score streaks, which you don't really apparently have a choice, although I'm wondering if a perk will set these to kill streaks. The big question that I have here is, will these be overwhelming the battlefield, as some early players have stated? Some of the game journalists have stated that they felt overwhelmed by the huge number of score streaks present in their matches, because the score streak scores don't reset when you die. What I'm particularly wondering is if not resetting these when you die means all players only essentially get 3 score streaks, or if the score streaks are on some kind of cooldown that may need to be tweaked as the game's development progresses. I'll be interested to see how it works this way, but it is something I'm going to be keeping a very close eye on, because that was a complaint of the early release alpha, which is what I'm going to call what the journalists and pro players had access to. The other thing I'm going to be keeping an eye on, for the most part, will be sniper rifles. They have removed scope glint, sprinting, and mounting. And regardless of your personal feelings on these, scope glint will make sniper rifles harder to see, especially in hardcore, which will be somewhat problematic for finding snipers and killing them. Mounting removes a lot of mid-range weapons' ability to combat sniper rifles, since even if you weren't fond of mounting, there's no denying that mounting gave assault rifles a decent chance at eliminating a sniper from a fair bit away. And of course, the loss of sprinting is a huge hit to SMGs, who, even with mounting, still have some difficulties combating sniper rifles. So I am somewhat concerned that the SMG class will be relatively moot, even as the game is described, as Cold War is described, as being faster than Modern Warfare. With the removal of the sprint, I'm not really sure that's going to wind up being true, even if it feels that way control-wise currently. Because I think once people figure out that snipers are so much more powerful because of the removal of these particular mechanics, and an increase in ADS speed across the board, that we're going to find SMGs have lost a lot of their punch, because SMGs were always popular for their fast ADS speed, and with mounting their ability to combat medium-range guns fairly reliably, making them much better than shotguns. Speaking of shotguns, we are now going to be having secondary shotguns, which normally isn't a problem, but with the sheer strength of sniper rifles, the anticipated strength of sniper rifles, let me rephrase that, in the coming alpha, and potentially the coming game, a sniper armed with a perfectly useful and effective shotgun without having to use a perk for it, or a wildcard, is quite the danger, since this even further eliminates the real need for SMGs. So I do have these kind of stacking concerns that SMGs will become something of a moot point with the inclusion of secondary shotguns and the removal of a lot of the mechanics that made SMGs possibly effective in the first place. So there are these particular classes that I'm going to be looking at in watching to see if my predictions here are true or not. Beyond that, there's really not a whole lot that I'm very specifically going to be keeping an eye on. There are some new modes that I'll be interested in experimenting with, especially the 12 vs 12, which is apparently very popular, and I will also be interested in personally experiencing the AI in the VIP protection mode, where one side is given a computer-controlled person to guard, and there have been varying reports as to the intelligence of the AI behind this computer-controlled person of interest. So it'll be interesting to see which side I fall on there. Another quick note would be that some people reported the game feeling a little sluggish in terms of response, that bullets didn't quite fly out as quickly as they would have preferred, or that something felt a little slower than it did in this one, or something feels a little imprecise. I'm not too worried about that, primarily because this is the alpha. Either they haven't tacked down the technology for it, or possibly those particular testers simply didn't have the kind of connection. A wide variety of people were provided with the pre-alpha, so to speak, and some of these aren't necessarily professional players, they're professional gaming journalists who might not necessarily have the kind of robust connection that a pro player would, especially since most of these complaints that I did hear about were from journalists, not the players themselves. So I think this is either something that the development team hasn't fully hashed out yet, because again, this is an alpha, or it's something unique to the connection of the people who complain about it in particular. Other than that, there has been some discussion as to whether or not the guns sound as good in the Cold War. This is a very minor point with me. I'm less concerned about how the guns sound. There has also been reports that the footprint sound is more clear, the directional sounds are clearer, which is a strange contrast to people complaining about how the guns themselves sound. So it'll be fairly interesting for me to approach this with a surround headset and see exactly how accurate those statements are. But I wanted to get all of this down into a video, so that way those of you who listen will know ahead of time what I am specifically looking to test in this alpha, and that way, come Monday, when I release my thoughts on the alpha, having played it for the weekend, I can accurately describe what my findings were on these particular points, and maybe some other ones I accidentally discover along the way. So, this is really the main reason why I'm putting this down here, and with that, you will hear about this again on Monday. In the meantime, thank you all very much for listening and or watching, and if you enjoyed this at all, please subscribe. If you didn't, don't go for it. It's totally up to you. Thank you all very much, and I hope you have a pleasant 24 hours.